join in, please let us know where you're joining from or say hi in the chat along with your favorite emoji. All right. So hello, everyone. Welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Every time I say that, I feel like I talk a little like a talk show or the Truman Show. I promise it's neither one of those here. My name is Nandini Harihar. I am a UN Foundation Next Generation India Fellow, and I'm honored to be your host as we kick off the second Engine Room Pit Stop of the year. For those who are new to the Engine Room is a digital platform. It's an intergenerational platform led entirely by young people to reimagine how the UN thinks, acts, and plans for the future. It's where we challenge the status quo, but not just challenge, where we provide recommendations, where we rethink of what already exists and what needs to be added, what's missing, how do we challenge it, how do we change it? And more importantly, it's about how we bring young people from across the world together to reflect and to ignite our shared ambition for a sustainable 2100 future. Now, before we jump into today's urgent topics, I'm excited to share some very exciting news for all of you. The Engine Room is officially on Discord. This is going to be our new digital home. Until now, the Engine Room sort of existed across different platforms, scattered campaigns, and temporary digital spaces. We reached over 2 million young people last year, and we've never had a place to call home. So that changes today. We chose Discord because we wanted a familiar space, a platform where young people can organize, collaborate, and build. But more importantly, we needed a focused home for a generational deeply invested in shaping the future, a generational deeply impacted by the digital change that is happening right now, and a space where huge challenges together can be discussed, the most urgent of those being climate change, an intergenerational, interconnected challenge, but also an opportunity for all of us to discuss what does it mean for our future, for our economy, for our societies, and for those that are yet to be born. The timing of this couldn't be more critical. We've just lived through one of the hottest years, and yet I say this every year that the next year will probably be worse. So we all have to come together to see where do we stop this tipping point and how do we bring the world together for our people, for the planet, through partnerships and for prosperity. So here's the thing, our future isn't written yet. So the good news is we're not starting from zero. Today we have more tools, more knowledge, and more global will than we ever have before. But I also say that as the world has changed, we also have more young people to call out for greater ambition and to act on this. The window is still open and young people are already walking through it. 2025 offers unprecedented opportunities with major milestones ahead, with the UN Ocean Conference in France, COP30 in Brazil, which will mark 10 years since the adoption of the most critical climate document that we've had, which is the Paris Agreement. We've already seen some promising momentum with the $1.3 trillion global finance goal, which was announced at COP30. But this is just the foundation. What we now need to do is how do we transition this commitment into actions on the ground? How do we turn this into a lasting momentum for a sustainable future? The pit stop gives us a chance to unpack some urgent priorities in climate adaptation and drive forward a momentum in policy before these major forums convene. So what do we have over the next 90 minutes? We'll be unpacking some major priorities with a powerful lineup of experts and young leaders. We will start with the spotlight featuring an exchange with a prominent leader and a young champion on climate financing challenges and solutions for young countries. Then we will move into a creative segment featuring Dem Mob, my apologies, an indigenous hip hop group from South Australia, who will ground us in how climate action is about identity, heritage, and hope. After that, we will dive into an intergenerational power panel where policymakers, young advocates will hold bold, actionable strategies for climate adaptation, water resilience, and ocean sustainability. Afterwards, we're turning the mic over to you because you are our most important audience, for you to ask questions from these experts and for you to also provide your opinions and ask them some tough questions. Then we will move into the closing remarks and call to action to help us carry today's energy into these global momentums ahead. Without further ado, I am absolutely thrilled to begin our spotlight segment. We're honored to have join us two remarkable leaders who embody the spirit of innovation and resilience. So it is my honor to introduce our first spotlight person, who is Ms. Alison Campbell. Ms. Campbell is the Director for Climate Action Team in the UN Secretary General's Office. Prior to that, she was UK's lead climate negotiator, covering the UNFCCC, G7, and G20, and acted as the co-chair of the global stocktake negotiations at COP27 and COP28. She brings a wealth of experience with over 15 years in advancing global climate solutions across the UK government and the EU, including as a negotiator for the Paris Agreement. Our second spotlight person today is Ms. Fatou Jung. Ms. Fatou is the co-founder of the Clean Earth Gambia and former UN Secretary General's Young Climate Advisor. Fatou's grassroots leadership and unwavering commitment for climate justice has inspired young people from across the world and policymakers alike. So please join me in digitally giving them an applause and welcoming Ms. Alison Campbell and Fatou Jung. Welcome to both of you. I am really looking forward to the segment with you today. I would like to give a quick housekeeping rule. I'm sorry about this, but we have a very tight schedule and we do have a lot to gain from you, but we do have a very tight window. So we have 15 minutes to do this spotlight. And honestly, I just want as much information as I can get from both of you. So my first question is going to be to both of you. As we get closer to key global events, and we've just gone through the Biodiversity COP in February, we have the Ocean Conference happening in June in France, and then we have COP30 in Brazil, as well as the Water Conference next year. So we have a plethora of moments that are coming up. What do you think is missing? Be it resources, technology, something else, and what could help communities who face climate impacts right now? What is required? I'll start with Ms. Campbell first in alphabetical order. And I'd request if you can keep that short, under 2 minutes.
Thank you, Nandini. Thank you for the introduction, and it's a pleasure to be here with you on the panel. I mean, I think the first thing to say is that obviously the scale of the impacts is increasing, and you've already mentioned it. We keep on having, the hottest month of the hottest year of the hottest decade, and we can see the impacts clearly in every corner of the globe. So, I mean, one important thing to say in terms of what would help communities facing impacts right now is obviously we need the big emitters to step up their efforts to keep temperatures below 1.5. But just on a more granular level, focusing in on finance, which is obviously a gap we have at the moment. I'd say it's finding the right tools to make sure that the right kinds of finance and technologies get to the right people at the right time and at scale. So we know the finance is out there, the technology is available, but what we need to do is change our investment patterns at every level, from the international financial institutions to the private sector, national banks, national, regional, and local and governments, to make sure that the finance gets to where we need it most. And just to take an example, 60% of the investment opportunities for the clean energy transition are in developing countries outside of China. But currently only 15% of the investment is going to developing countries outside of China. So we need to change this. We need to lower the cost of capital. We need to incorporate climate risk in investments. And we also need to make sure we're using the public finance, especially the concessional finance in the right ways to ensure the most vulnerable can access it, particularly for adaptation. So I'll just finish by saying, that needs to be driven at the local level so the money gets where it's needed. And we also need to get smarter in our ways of cooperating to do that on a larger scale. But I'll leave it there, given the time constraints. Thanks, Nandini.
Thank you very much, Ms. Campbell. I'll pass on to Ms. Jung.
Thank you so much, Nandini and Alison, for really setting the tone of the conversation. And as you've mentioned, it's really critical, especially given the global events that are actually happening in the coming months, but also even the previous climate high-level conversations that have actually happened over the past years. I mean, you've talked about the issue of climate finance and making sure that it is accessible and it is given to the people that actually need it the most. But I mean, I am a daughter of a farmer. I am from a country that is one of the most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. and my city is actually at risk of rising sea level. And I have actually gone the length and breadth of the Gambia, engaging communities. But one thing that actually remains critical is the fact that when we talk about climate financing, it is not community focused. We sit in the climate conferences and make commitments to actually support the most vulnerable communities to adapt to the impact of climate change. But then the frontline communities do not really benefit from it. And, you know, and this makes it a problem, because then we see that there is a huge disconnect in terms of what we discuss in high-level conferences and actually what we see on the realities in the ground and the people that actually matters the most. So for me, I think we need to make sure that when we are making commitments, especially around climate financing and climate adaptation, we need to make sure we are designing these with these communities that are the most important, and we make sure that it is being accessed by these communities that actually need it the most. In addition to that, Alison mentioned the issue of technologies. We have now seen the rise in AI. We've seen innovations from young people, from organizations, among others, bringing in solutions to ensure that we are building the resilience of communities. But then the fact is that most of these technologies are actually also not contextualized. And we need to make sure that people face different realities. The climate impacts that maybe people in the global north actually are facing will be different from the challenges that people in the global south are facing, even though the climate impact is actually affecting all of us. So we need to make sure that when we are designing solutions, especially around, Alison mentioned technology, it needs to make sure that it is also being contextualized in the context that communities will be able to benefit from them, to be able to help them in building their resilience. So I know you mentioned we have 2 minutes, but I have a lot to say around this issue, and I hope we have more time, especially around the other aspect, to actually bring in some of the other concerns that I actually have, but also how we can be able to make sure we are forging ahead in making sure that we are building more solutions that really matters the most to the people that actually need to benefit from it.
Thank you very much to both of you. And Fatu, I could not agree with you more. Honestly, we've been doing these youth consultations, part of the fellowship for our India report. And some of the insights that we've got from that has been on, we're talking about climate change, but are we talking about what is happening on the ground? Are we talking about how do we sort of transition policies to actually impact on the ground? How do we bring finance and technology that is actually usable for people and for communities here on the ground, that is adapted to them, that they can adopt? And very recently, actually this morning, we had a consultation with the Indian diaspora from the EU, and all of them spoke about the lack of skill development that is yet to happen in India. So when they move out, when they go out, whether that is lack of financial literacy, lack of digital literacy, lack of usability of AI tools that they think their peers already have, all of these are skills that, yes, not so much related to climate change, but these are all educational skills that are so much still lacking with people across the world. So thank you very much for that. And honestly, the passion in your voice it kind of blew me away. But I will have to move on to the next question now. So Alison, to you. Looking back at COP29, what achievements and remaining challenges do you see shaping the road to COP30? Particularly when it comes to climate finance? I know you already spoke about the need for investment patterns to change and also for the right tools to be available. So whether that is the financing for development conference that is happening in Seville, or whether that is the roadmap from Baku to Berlin on how do we strategize the 1.3 trillion at COP30, where do you think young people and the youth can play a bigger role in this particular process? And how do we close this ambitious gap? How do we bring results to the ground?
Thanks, Nandini. Thanks, Nandini. So looking in terms of the key achievements, if we look back at the last two COPs, we have had some big outcomes. So firstly, at COP28, we agreed through the global stocktake an important set of energy transition goals, and that countries would bring forward 1.5 aligned climate plans. And then at COP29, we had the really important outcome of the new finance goal, where we agreed 300 billion should be mobilized through public finance by 2035, and also to develop a roadmap to reach 1.3 trillion to developing countries by 2035. And so those are important signals. But I think, as Fatu, very clearly laid out in her last answer, we really need to make sure that then that gets implemented and it gets down to the ground to the people who need it the most, and that they're involved in kind of shaping what happens next. So, I mean, just in terms of the challenges, I have three that I just want to flag. We're in a really difficult context this year, facing a lot of geopolitical headwinds. The first challenge, we've already said every single scientific report has all the climate indicators flashing red, and we know they're going to, they're increasing around the world, and particularly for the most vulnerable. But the second challenge is that despite the urgency that we're facing, there is a kind of false narrative emerging that action on climate is too costly, that countries are stepping back. So the Secretary General and President Lula convened world leaders last week and demonstrated that this is not true. There was a really strong message from President Xi Jinping of China, from Presidents von der Leyen and Costa of the European Union, and we had the chair of the ASEAN group, president of the African Union, of the Alliance of Small Island States, and then they were really clear that the world is moving forward on climate change, strong commitment to multilateralism, and also they pointed out the huge economic benefits of the energy transition and that they want to cooperate with each other. So these are all important signals at the high level. We're seeing more and more evidence that the clean energy sector is good for economic growth, for jobs. And as the Secretary General has said, it's the economic opportunity of the 21st century. So, we really need to work to overcome the false narrative that climate is too costly. I think that's the first point I want to make. And then just onto the third challenge, which goes down back to what I started with, and then what Fatou said is that currently the transition is not fair. Right? Most of the investment is going to the advanced economies, as I said. It's not going to developing countries, and then it's also not fair kind of within countries. Not enough of it is going to the local level where it really needs to be implemented. So, our big challenge this year is to make sure that first of all, the roadmap to 1.3 trillion demonstrates that this finance can be unlocked, but also that it can be unlocked in the right way, and that the money will be there to support the communities in dealing with the impacts. We need creativity and innovation. We need people to be engaged, and it's a very consultative process around the 1.3 trillion. There's lots of opportunities for people to get involved and have their voices heard on how that roadmap needs to come together. And in terms of how the youth and civil society can play a big role, well, the Secretary General has consistently said that the voices of young people are what gives him hope. We do need young people in civil society. We need to advocate for the benefits of the energy transition, particularly that the transition needs to be a just one, to rebut this narrative that climate is too costly and that people don't care anymore. I mean, it's not true. We heard that very clearly through Fatou's passionate answer to the previous question. And, we need to, not just at the leader level, demonstrate that action is happening on the ground, in cities, in regions, in communities. There are many champions who are moving forward with climate action, regardless of what's happening in politics. And we need to empower those champions and raise their voices. So, I think the message is we really need the advocacy, we need the hope, and we need the support now more than ever. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that. Alison, I will now move on to Fatou. So Fatou, through your work with the Clean Earth Gambia, you've mobilized thousands of young people to build a community for climate resilience. What lessons can global leaders learn from grassroots initiatives and youth initiatives such as yours? So how can we such that they can better support and scale up local adaptation efforts?
Thank you so much. I mean, I got involved in the climate space a decade ago because I was seeing the impacts of climate change, but I wasn't knowing what exactly climate change actually meant to me because we did not have climate education incorporated in our basic and elementary school system. And even to date, that is one of our major advocacies to actually have climate education incorporated in our basic and elementary school system. But one key lesson that I've actually learned over the past years, leading one of the biggest youth-led NGOs in the Gambia, is that we fail to understand, especially our leaders, fail to understand that communities, especially locally led communities and the initiatives that they actually have, need to be co-designed by the communities, and the solutions that are being proposed need to be done in consultations with communities. And at Clean Art, this is one of the core principles that we continue to carry in our engagements, whether it's our climate education projects, whether it's our restoration work, planting trees across the country, whether it's our advocacy work, and whether it's just our consultation with communities, especially in protecting the land of women farmers, among others. So we have ensured that we make sure these communities take ownership of these projects, because when we make sure that we are telling communities that this is something that is for you, if it goes well, it's for you, because there are so many benefits of addressing the climate impacts. And we make sure that when we are communicating with them, we tell them that this is for them and they need to take ownership. We build trust with them. And at the end of the day, it really helps a lot in making sure that the projects that we do have lasting impacts, even if we're not there. For instance, the tree planting that we did at Banjul, planting over 15,000 coconut trees with the Banjul City Council and Future Proof, we made sure that we were working with the communities and they actually joined us in this tree planting initiative. And now these trees are all grown up and people actually use these trees to actually, have picnics with their families, enjoy the shade, among others. But one thing I've seen that we fail to do, especially our global leaders, is that we, most of the time, take a top-down approach, especially in terms of working with communities. And I think that is not the best way, because a top-down approach sometimes actually fails to actually build trust and also create a mutual process where there is lesson learned between the communities and the government. And we need to make sure that we are doing away with that and actually make sure we are using a top-down approach, at least where we're making sure the concerns, the solutions, and the recommendations of communities are incorporated. And one thing I'll suggest is making sure that, first of all, as a young person, starting an organization from zero money to actually fundraising funding to actually really implement a lot of projects, we've always had problems. And this is the same for almost all youth-led NGOs around the world, in Africa, in the global south, among others. Is that access to direct funding for young people and community organizations has been a challenge. And with the current funding models we have, is so burdensome and is so bureaucratic, and it makes it really difficult and actually makes young people lose hope, because there are so many paperwork, there are so many bureaucracies, so traditional models really doesn't really work. And we need to make sure that we're doing away with that and make sure that access to funding is actually easier for young people and community organizations. For instance, young people or youth-led NGOs actually receive less than 1% of global funding. Feminist-led NGOs actually receive less than 1% of global funding. And indigenous communities receive less than 3% of global funding. So when we talk about funding, then where is it going? Because the people that need it the most, the communities that need it the most, still do not have access to it. So we need to rethink our funding model and make it more accessible. The second part of it, actually, you've briefly touched on it, Nandihi, is the fact that obviously we always need capacity building, because young people are leading projects. So capacity building on project management, on leadership, etc., is always an addition for us in the work that we do, because the more we upskill ourselves, the more we are continuing to improve the lives of communities. And we need to make sure that, we are having these access for young people, especially in remote and hard-to-reach countries, to be able to upskill themselves. And another thing is the fact that we still continue to have young people tokenized in global decision-making spaces. Young people, obviously, over the years have built their skills and their experiences, and we need to make sure that our governments or our leaders stop tokenizing us. We need to be brought to the table as experts who are contributing to the process, but not just to tick boxes or numbers to say that we brought a young person on board. So grassroots actors should be a part of the decision-making processes, so that they are part of setting priorities from the start to the end, and not just when they need to tick boxes that they have been actually a part of the process. Because when young people are supported, innovation and resilience actually makes it easy for it to follow naturally. So these are things that we really need to work on.
Thank you so much, Fatou. I couldn't have agreed with you more on the last point, particularly about being like these tokenistic tick boxes, that whether that is someone from a grassroots level, whether that is a young person, whether that is a woman for a lot of times on panels that need to be added. But honestly, Alison and Fatou, both of you, thank you very, very much it was a very short segment, but there is just so much that we've all taken away from your discussions, whether that is on who needs to be stepping it up, whether that is on the fact that we need to start skilling people on the ground, whether that is with climate education, with skills, with making them understand, or whether with entrepreneurial spirit, or on the bureaucratic level, how do we ensure that the financing towards young people, financing for young people, for entrepreneurial activities is made less bureaucratic, is made simpler, is made easier? How do we even change the financial landscape when it comes to like access to finance for different countries? So there's a lot that we've taken away from this conversation today. And honestly, I couldn't have asked for a better way to start this particular session. So before I move on to the next session, I just want to ensure that I once again want to highlight that we have moved on to a digital platform called Discord for staying connected through such conversations in the engine room. My colleague would have dropped the link for the Discord engine room in the chat for all of you, just so we have a global hub where all of us can stay connected, collaborate, as well as take action for the future. So moving on to our next segment, which is the creative message. Let's turn our attention to a special message. Oh my God, I'm very excited by the last segment that I'm kind of missing my words now. By Dem Mob. So Dem Mob formed in the APY lands of Pukadja, becoming the first hip hop group from the region and the first MCs to rap in Pijanjanjara. Their mission is to empower young people through their culture, through their music. 2023 was their breakout year with the single Still No Justice and Soul of the Lion, performing in packed crowds at WOMAD. Today, we're honored to share their powerful track with you. It's called The Soul of the Lion, along with the message that they've recorded for all of us. So let's again give them a big digital welcome and have a listen.
Hey everybody, good morning. This is Dem Mob, this is Payday, this is Jimps, Jay Luce, and Gus Edwards.
Yeah, we're really excited for you guys to get together at this forum, and we're really proud of all the work that you guys are doing. You're about to see our song Soul of the Lion. That song's really about, it's not necessarily specifically to do with climate change, but it's to do with leadership, and you're all young leaders at the moment. And when you're working on such important issues like climate change, there's always going to be people that oppose those views. And so this song Soul of the Lion's about no matter what people say, you know what you're doing and you know how to keep your heart strong. So enjoy the song. Thank you.
I got the soul of the lion, it can't be like that. I got the soul for the haters, the frauds and the clowns. I got the soul of the lion, it can't be like that. I got the soul for the haters. I got the soul of the lion, it can't be like that. I got the soul for the haters, the frauds and the clowns. I got the soul of the lion, it can't be like that. I got the soul for the haters. I don't want to go to the never walk away by A. Kunari Kulanya number A, Mandanaga number A. Dieye13 and SDG14. Just live your life, don't you live in fear. I don't want to go to the never walk away by A. Kunari Kulanya number A, Mandanaga number A. Dieye13 and SDG14. Just live your life, don't you live in fear. I got no desire to be admired, I'm here to inspire. But your flaming is lame and I'm already on fire. Your shame game getting die, you missed the qualifier. You think you're getting high, you stink, you a liar. Hate, let me make this message clear. I know what let's go to Bangara. Let's change the way we live our life, I got more pain, don't you step in my shoes. Just like as soon as a weak man don't understand, they just assume. But it's okay, it's just the way it's on crop bucket life. They pull you back in again, it's the way they not gonna change. But people be the same, not moving like the seasons. It's treason, I'm sitting in the cold, freezing like Leo and Titanic, shipwrecking Atlantic. Out of the planet, but I ain't volcanic, so don't panic. I got the soul of the lion, I got the soul. I got the soul, I got the soul of the lion. I got the soul of the lion, it can't be like that. I got the soul for the haters, the frauds and the clowns. I got the soul of the lion, it can't be like that. I got the soul for the haters. I don't want to go to A, never walk away by A. Kunari Kulanya number A, Mandanaga number A. Dieye13 and SDG14. Just live your life, don't soul, I got the 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 soul. Time to get up, start with the hustle tribe. I'm an animal, if I kill on beats, I'm the cannibal. Unbearable, it's terrible. Thoughts got me feel like Ferris wheel. Lose organ like Franksters cutting souls. What's my next move? Tasteable, motivational. Words doesn't even phrase the way I roll, so we hit hard road. This shit ain't clickbait, not flexing for that Tinder date. Not claiming the greatest, new things can be dangerous. Don't trip on your latest fingers off the haters like soul of the lion. I got the soul, I got the soul of the lion. Soul of the lion, they can't be like them. I got no soul for the haters, the frauds and the clam. I got the soul of the lion, they can't be like them. I got the soul for the haters.
Yo, I don't know what gifts you've got, but you're all gifted. And if you had the time to grow collectively, we could be lifted. But somewhere along the line, that idea got shifted. We cut down the tall poppies, and now all of our dreams have become restricted. And here we stand convicted of doing nothing more than staying consistent. And a minute, we are committed to hit it without being assisted. But to think, for 1 minute, acquitted of jealousy and greed, we could all be freed. And with our dreams compassionately permitted, we could all exist in it.
Wow. Just wow. That was absolutely incredible. I was actually nodding my head and dancing throughout it, and I was told by my tech team to like turn off my camera if I really want to be dancing it all out. But that was absolutely fantastic and incredible. What a song. So I'm presuming that's energized everyone even more for the next segment, which is going to be absolutely fantastic. So as we continue on to this journey towards a sustainable future, it's essential that we talk a bit more not on the interconnection of climate action, which is adaptation, resilience, oceans, resources, all of that. So I'm happy to now hand over the baton to Kerrlene Wills, who is the Director of Climate and Oceans at the UN Foundation, who brings a wealth of experience on multilateral diplomacy and ocean climate policy. She'll be moderating the upcoming intergenerational panel. So over to you, and I hope you guys enjoy the rest of the segment. Thank you.
Thank you, Nandini, and thank you to Demob for that powerful message. A reminder that climate action is about more than numbers. It's about identity, it's about resilience, and protecting what we hold dear, right? And I also want to thank Alison and Fatu for their real-life reflections on the impacts of climate change and climate financing, highlighting the importance of the just and equitable transition in the energy sector, as well as working alongside local communities in climate change education. I'm just blown away by the powerful messaging, and we just got started. So as Nandini said, I'm Kerrlene Wills, and it is a pleasure to be with you all here today. And building upon the themes that we just explored, this panel aims to delve into the actionable solutions that can drive meaningful change ahead of global meetings such as COP30, the 2025 UN Ocean Conference, and if you'll be there, I'll be there, and the 2026 UN Water Conference. I'm thrilled to introduce our distinguished panelists. So first, please join me in welcoming the panelists. I'm delighted to introduce His Excellency, Dr. Cheikh Tidiane, Senegal's Minister of Water and Sanitation. Dr. Dieye plays a pivotal role in shaping water governance policies and is actively involved in preparations for the upcoming UN Water Conference. Although he couldn't be with us here today, due to some last-minute changes in his calendar, he remains deeply committed to this issue and enthusiastic about contributing to this important dialogue, and has kindly provided recorded responses to the questions that we will be posing today. Up next is Adriana Blaszek, joining from, she's our amazing young climate expert and economist. Adriana focuses on developing economic instruments to accelerate climate adaptation and ensure equitable access to climate finance for developing countries. Up next, I'm delighted to introduce Ms. Ana Paula Prates. Ana is a distinguished Brazilian marine conservation expert with over 30 years of experience in environmental public service. As the current director of the Department of Ocean and Coastal Management at Brazil's Ministry of Environment and Climate Change, she leads national initiatives connecting ocean conservation with climate policy. Up next, we are also joined by Charity Rupati. Charity is an indigenous scientist and advocate from Alaska. She integrates traditional ecological knowledge with scientific research to champion climate justice and indigenous representation. We also have with us Angelique Pomponu, who I know personally, so hey, Angelique. Angelique is an environmental lawyer and advocate from the Seychelles. Angelique specializes in ocean finance and works tirelessly to support small island developing states in achieving sustainable ocean management. And last but not least, in our lineup of amazing panelists, we have Gunraj Talwar, a sustainable urban development advocate from India. Gunraj emphasizes community engagement and circular economy principles to enhance climate resilience in rapidly urbanizing areas. As we dive in, I'll be inviting our panelists to respond to one another, build on ideas, and help us uncover threads of shared urgency and opportunity. So this is really an opportunity for you to interact, not just with me as the moderator, but with each other as the panelists to give us an exciting discussion. So to kick off, I'd like to turn to Minister Cheikh. Sorry, I've choked. Minister Cheikh Tidiane. As co-host of the upcoming UN Water Conference, you've emphasized the need for transformative action in water governance. What specific strategies are being considered to address water scarcity and sanitation challenges in Africa? And how can international cooperation be enhanced to support these efforts?
Thank you very much, moderator, for your question. As co-chair of the upcoming UN Water Conference, and in line with the strategic vision upheld by the Senegalese presidency of AMCAO, we are focusing on transformative action in water governance. In the face of challenges related to water scarcity and sanitation in Africa, several specific strategies are being considered. First, we aim to promote water and sanitation security for all by strengthening sectoral governance, accelerating the implementation of SDG6, and mobilizing public and private investment in sustainable infrastructure. Second, we are working on developing a new African water vision post-2025, placing water at the heart of the continental priorities to ensure equitable access to water and sanitation while ensuring climate resilience. Our strategy also relies on high-level political advocacy, aiming to make water one of the strategic priorities of the African Union and its member states, notably by promoting or proposing the adoption of 2026 as the Year of Water in Africa. Furthermore, the action agenda we advocate for Africa, based on collective agenda, cooperation, systemic transformation, innovation, optimization, and inclusion, will guide all our efforts. In terms of international cooperation, we advocate for a convergent approach to the agendas of water, climate, and oceans to build integrated and coordinated responses to global challenges. In this regard, Senegal and the United Arab Emirates, as co-chair of the 2026 Water Conference, are actively working to connect these global issues in the spirit of the United Nations Water Conference of 2023. Finally, we want to strengthen strategic partnership, encourage innovation, and field implementation, while ensuring inclusion so that no one will be left behind. We firmly believe that only collective mobilization, strengthened by effective international solidarity, will ensure a prosperous, resilient, and equitable future for Africa and for all the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And so we heard from Minister some of the really important challenges for him in trying to address water challenges and mobilizing public and private investment in sustainable water management, ensuring access to sanitation, aiming to make water one of the strategic priorities for his government. So I think this is a good segue into some of the work that you do, Adriana. And, according to UNEP's Adaptation Gap Report 2023, only a small fraction, about less than 1/5 of climate finance currently reaches local communities. And we heard the passionate speech by Fatu earlier as well on this key issue. So what strategies can be employed to ensure financial resources are more effectively directed to grassroots adaptation initiatives, especially those led by young people and even in support of some of the challenges presented by Minister? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the invitation. It's an honor to be here. And also thank you for the question, because it's a crucial issue for me personally. And as you mentioned, less than 1/5 of climate finance actually reaches local communities now. And that means that people who are experiencing the climate crisis the most, that are suffering the consequences, aren't being properly supported. And when it comes to young people, it's even harder to access support for their grassroots initiatives. So my question is why? First, before coming to strategies. And I think there's not so much trust in local communities and young people, and maybe government may not see our potential. And because the system wasn't designed with us in mind, and a lot of climate finance flows through, as Fatu said, the top-down channels, so government agencies, big NGOs, institutions, and they often see young informal groups as like too risky or maybe too inexperienced. But what they miss, in like my opinion, is that young people are often closer to the issues and to the solutions, because we're living the reality and we're building creative responses out of necessity. We actually see what's needed and what needs to be done. And the problem isn't that young people aren't ready for the change, but the system hasn't caught up with how the leadership is actually changing right now. So coming to strategies, I think we completely need to rethink how funding is structured. Right now, it's often designed for big institutions, as I said. It's formal, it's complex, sometimes very slow, from my experience, I can say. And we need to make the funding process simpler and more transparent, in my opinion. And a lot of amazing grassroots projects that I know don't get funded simply because the paperwork is overwhelming and the language is over-technical. So if we can imagine how different it would be if we had smaller, quicker grants with simpler applications for young people. And I have an example from my scouting organization, because I'm a scout. And we actually implemented this solution in our organization, and it really worked, and it encouraged young people to apply for grants. We just needed to simplify the process of applying. And the next crucial thing, in my opinion, is partnerships, especially across generations, when older institutions are more experienced and the leaders can actively support young people, whether it's because of through co-applying for funding or offering mentorship, sharing networks. The impact can be so much greater, right? If we just cooperate. We don't need to do this alone. And in fact, I think that we shouldn't do this alone. And the last thing, I think we need policies that require a part of the adaptation funding going directly to local and youth-led projects, as also Fatu said. And a lot of things needs to be done, but I really want to emphasize this, that I think there is hope. And I'm already starting to see more initiatives that are actually designed to reach people where they are, made by big companies or by the government. And one example I've seen working well in Poland, it's where I come from, is the participatory budget. It's the mechanism where local residents can directly propose some ideas and also vote for projects that they want to see in the neighborhoods. And it gives real decision-making power to local communities. What I love about it is just it flips the usual dynamic, right? Instead of waiting for the top-down funding, people are giving trust. And I think this is the key word. People are trusted to know what the communities need most. And young people get involved in this process too, so whether it's proposing green spaces or climate education. And I hope a system like this can be applied in more countries and regions, really. So yes, the challenges are real, but the solutions, I want to mention that they are already happening. And the more we build on them, the closer we can get to a system that actually works for everyone and for a more sustainable world. So to wrap up, I think it's not only about moving the money, but it's about trust. Trusting the people and local knowledge and trusting the climate adaptation can look in many different ways, right? Not just the way it has been done so far. So the solutions are already here on the table. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you for those reflections, Adriana. And I think the thread of trust in this is just really important. And it's very critical in the context of talking about multilateral diplomacy and multilateral policy that addresses climate change. And, how can we incorporate more young people into that and give them more responsibility and trusting that they know what's right for their communities and their future that they're ready to invest in. And I think that's a good segue into one of the biggest multilateral discussions that happens on climate change at COP30, which will be in Brazil this year. And with that, I have a question for you, Anna. You work with oceans and you've powerfully described the ocean as the planet's greatest climate regulator. I love the ocean because that's what I work in. And yet it's often sidelined in some of these discussions in global climate change. And I'm seeing some parallels in terms of like the voice of young people in the discussion and the importance of the ocean in climate change. Maybe can you talk to us as Brazil prepares to host COP30 and engage in the UN Ocean Conference coming up in June? In what ways can we, one, align ocean conservation with climate action, and two, maybe incorporate more young voices into the conversation on climate action in the ocean space?
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for this question, and thank you so much for this opportunity. And everyone here is today for bringing your energy, your voice, and your communities. Thank you so much. And wow, for the panel that we see before. I want to begin by saying this, the ocean is not just a victim to a climate crisis. It is one of our greatest allies in solving it. So because that the ocean and the coastal and marine ecosystem are absolutely essential for both mitigation and adaptation. And they are the planet primary climate regulator. And when we conserve ocean biodiversity like mangroves, coral reefs, seagrass, and all the creatures, marine creatures, we are protecting a natural system that not only help us to adapt it to climate impact, but actually reduce the drives of climate change. One of the most effective tools for this, we have to support this role in the creation and well-maintenance, of course, marine protected areas. And they strengthen biodiversity, build the resilience of coast communities, and can lock away carbon in ways we are only beginning to fully understanding. So they can be not just conservation tools, but probably climate solution. But there's the challenge. Despite of this, the ocean still remain sidelined in too many global climate discussion, include all the COPs of climate change. At the COPs in the National Climate Plan, in adaptation and mitigation finance, the ocean is often treated as a secondary steps. And because that we believe the moment is now, because we have this moment in these years, is a ocean year with all this trial needs to be learned, passed to the bone. COP30 for us is a unique opportunity. It's the first COP to be hosted in the Amazon region and the ecosystem deeply connected to the ocean through rivers, estuaries, and the world's largest continuous stretch of mangroves in the world. It's a change to move towards centuries the ocean and climate ambition. And the COP 29 last year, Brazil, for the first time, have included the ocean-based solution in our NDC, which ambition in the align with 1.5 degrees targets. This measures are already guiding our climate policies, and we are aligned to the National Biodiversity Strategy, our PUMP, and BSAPs, and action plan with our climate plan. Therefore, we have a number of challenges that we said here. Challenge to the COP to resolve the COP30, starting with the question of the need to implement all the agreements already approved, up the question of financing, but beyond that, we have the challenge of include the negotiation, the important role of ocean to the various of the solution. Because that in this trail, nice to Belém, is we are proud to co-facilitating in 2000 here in June, the Ocean and Climate Challenge dialogue with Belgium and the Substa, which we will have and the Bonn just following week after UNOC 3. Our goal is simpler in that we move from ambition to action. We want to ensure that the ocean is not longer just a backdrop, but a central solution-oriented part of global climate response and negotiation. That means we want to encourage countries to include ocean-based measures in their new or update NDCs. It means make climate finance accessible for marine adaptation. And it means work across the biodiversity and ocean and climate agenda, not in silos, but in synergy together. And most of all, it means doing to work with people, with young leaders, indigenous people, indigenous communities, coastal and coastal traditional communities, scientists, fishermen, and civil society. So how do you better align ocean conservation with climate action? We recognize the ocean for what is this is a climate hero. And we want to invest in it, we restore it, and we make sure the ocean voice, especially for the global south, are ahead and valued at every step. Because real climate solutions come from the ocean, we believe that, and for the ocean, and with the people who depend on it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that response, Anna. And I think you said something really important about real solutions, and not thinking about the ocean as a victim of the climate crisis, but how can the ocean save us from the climate crisis as the primary regulator? And thinking about all the coastal communities, and one thing that you mentioned, really important, the indigenous peoples that depend upon the ocean. And I think that goes beautifully into some of the work that you do, Charity, about bridging and the indigenous knowledge into some of these spaces. And as we look towards COP30, how can some infrastructure projects like those suggesting maybe permafrost thaw or water access be designed to, address some of the climate challenges that we're facing, incorporate discussions on ocean, and be designed to honor the indigenous values and ensure long-term resilience for communities in the Arctic that, depend on the ocean space?
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I really love the comment about how we should view the ocean as our ally, because something that we're taught as indigenous peoples is that we steward that ocean, we take care of it, we take care of that land. And much of the healthy environment, healthy oceans, healthier rivers, healthier coasts actually lie under our stewardship from the Arctic all the way to the Pacific. So this isn't just an isolated thing that happens in the Arctic, but it happens throughout the world with indigenous peoples. And as an Inuit youth and water engineer, I firmly believe that infrastructure projects must begin with relationships. And honoring these indigenous values means centering our knowledge systems from the very start and not simply as these afterthoughts are just an add-on. And in the Arctic, we are not preparing for climate change. These are things that we already live on a daily. Entire communities are literally sinking into the ocean. And these are things that have been happening for decades. Some communities have to have haul water by hand, which mine has faced in the past. But despite these challenges, our communities carry generations of place-based knowledge that's rooted in respect, balance, and this deep observation of seasonal cycles, which offers essential insight for sustainable solutions in the UN space at COP30. And that's why climate resilient infrastructure, honestly, anything, it must be co-designed with us, not just for us. So this idea of free, prior, and informed consent, as outlined in the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, must be implemented meaningfully, not just as a legal checkbox, but as a framework for partnership, even in the design and engineering space. And this means involving elders, our hunters, and youth in engineering decisions, adapting materials and technologies to local conditions, and aligning with Indigenous timescales that look beyond these short-term fixes are almost like a band-aid, because these are things that have been happening to us for a long time. It's also vital to recognize that infrastructure isn't just a physical thing. I think something that we're taught is that it's relational. It includes our cultural and spiritual ties to our land and water, which are foundational to our health and survival, not only as Native people, but also just as humans across the world. And by valuing this Indigenous knowledge alongside engineering expertise and seeing it almost as equal, if not better. I hold a certain bias though, because I'm also Indigenous, but we can create infrastructure that truly supports long-term resilience for Arctic communities. And we're taught that when this works for us, it benefits us, it also benefits everyone all over the world. Yeah.
Thank you, Charity, for that. And you know, I like what you said about, you know, infrastructure is not just the physical thing that you put up. It also, when you're talking about communities, when you're talking about, you know, Indigenous peoples, and you're talking about the spiritual ties that, you know, people have to their land, and the meanings behind it. So sometimes, and I think it goes back to what Fatu was saying, and a theme that we heard throughout is that you have to create solutions alongside the people that you're working with, so that you understand what you're building and developing does what people need it to do, and in respect of the land that they live on. So that's a really powerful message that we can take with us. And I know one of the things that you also mentioned was about the land in the Arctic is that it's disappearing. And I know that that's something that small island states can really relate to. I know even in the context of the Pacific, some of the islands are disappearing, and they have to think of mitigation and adaptation strategies to not only move their people, but also to preserve their culture. So all of these things seem to be tied in and have a common thread. And with that, I want to turn to Angelique and some of the work that she does. Angelique, given that you work with small island developing states and initiatives like Ocean Risk and Resilience Action Alliance, how can innovating financing mechanisms be scaled to support ocean sustainability and resilience in SIDS ahead of UNOC in June?
Thank you very much, Kerrlene, and thanks everyone for this really inspiring conversation. I think it's a great way to start the day with so much energy and inspiration. And Ana Paula, really good to see you. Hope we meet in Belém or before that, so we can continue pushing the ocean agenda for COP30. Kerrlene, thanks so much for your question. And I think I'm going to take a step back, and it's really nice to see in the chat that we do have a youth from Mauritius. I hope there are more young people from small island developing states tuning in to this conversation. Well, I'm going to take a step back and really highlight, what a lot of us from SIDS think, everybody gets. But really is some of the combination of these characteristics that have created this very distinct context or special case for development and environmental challenges for small island developing states. And perhaps it's things people have already heard, but sometimes it's not. So first, especially, and here I want to emphasize that your question is in relation to finance. Obviously, we heard Fatu's very passionate plea about the need for finance to reach the communities, and certainly I make the same as it relates to SIDS and local communities in SIDS. So first is this small population. My own home country, Seychelles, has a population of 100,000 people. That prevents economies of scale virtually in every sector, right? The usual thing we've read in every textbook, you need to have markets, you need to have a big labor force. Well, there's 100,000 people. The second is geographic isolation. We often say we're in the middle of the ocean, right? We really are. And that dramatically increases transportation costs, complicates connectivity, just in terms of getting goods and services in, but also getting goods and services out. And when we focus on the small, we're actually talking about terrestrial space, right? There is limited terrestrial resources, but of course, small island developing states have this vast ocean territories. And I've been thinking about this in preparation for this meeting and to say, how do I reconcile saying we have limited resources terrestrially, but then vast ocean resources, so we have a lot of resources. And really the issue is that we have limited capacity, technological, technical, and infrastructure to harness those resources. So I was in school when I was probably about 10 years old, and they told us economic diversification will save SIDS. Decades later, we are waiting for what this economic diversification looks like. And the only sort of pivot is that and we've always known as SIDS the importance of the ocean. But what's next? How do we move from that point, right? And of course, the other element that everyone knows, I hope, is this paradox of prosperity that SIDS have to deal with. That despite all our vulnerabilities, SIDS continue to have relatively high gross domestic product per capita, right? Because of course, if you divide 8 by 2, you're going to get a bigger number versus if you divide 8 by 4. So 100,000 people is a small number to divide it by, and you're going to get a high GDP. But what that means is we get locked out of access to concessional finance and grants, whilst at the same time, climate change continues to get worse. And then, of course, then this is a developing country issue. It's always seen as risky, right? This whole idea that's very risky to invest in developing countries. So what do we do about it? And I'm so happy to be speaking to you on the final day that we have to close the UNOC 3 declaration. AOSIS continues to advocate for stronger financial commitments in the declaration. They're not strong enough right now. We're still pushing. It's the final hours. We don't know if we're going to get taken seriously, but we're still pushing the bounds to make sure that when we're saying we're going to commit to do all these things, there is new and additional finance on the table. It cannot just be a repurposing of existing finance, taking it away from other places. But you've asked me to speak about SIDS and innovative financing and using these new tools. And yes, small island developing states, we've gone for the sort of mainstream. The system needs to be fixed. We need the multidimensional vulnerability index. Yes, we've gone for strengthening language in political declarations. Yes, we're still advocating strongly in the climate finance process. But we can't sit and wait. So we've had to push further. We've had to turn to blended finance, especially as our access is being curtailed. So you will hear things like Bahamas, Belize, Barbados, Seychelles doing debt for nature swaps. Seychelles has done the blue bond. And now there's this thinking about how do we replicate that, but to make it a corporate blue bond for other countries. So yes, we are turning to innovative financing. But I want to end my time with just a certain reflection about the scale. You know, the conventional view of scale serves investor priorities, right? The number needs to be big enough for them to get out of bed. But that framework doesn't quite capture the SIDS reality and potential. And like local communities, like young people, SIDS are often not in those decision-making processes. They're not in the boardrooms. So perhaps we need to think about this differently when we think about SIDS, right? Because everybody says they want to help SIDS. And very often, you know, we call that SIDS washing, right? Everybody says they want to help SIDS, but do they want to think differently? No. So first is thinking about how replication across contexts becomes our version of scale. Doesn't have to be all in one country. Maybe it can be a regional approach where we pool resources, we pool debt to really bring up that scale. And there are mechanisms like conservation trust funds operating at a regional level that perhaps could assist in that. But most importantly, we must question if financial scale is even the right metric in thinking about climate justice and thinking about sustainable ocean management. Perhaps our success should be measured by ocean health, community resilience, and climate adaptation outcomes. Kerrlene, thank you very much. I'll end it there.
Yes, thank you for that very powerful message, Angelique. And, you know, as being from a SID from Guyana, I understand some of the challenges you face. I mean, Guyana only had 800,000 people. It's a different situation now, but economies of scale is a huge, huge issue. But I think something that you touched on that's really powerful is the power of the collective. And the importance of, you know, small island states being able to come together in these multilateral negotiations to really advocate for the things that are important to them. And it becomes, I mean, infectious sounds like a disease, but it's something that drives ambition in a lot of these climate discussions where I think that if SIDS were not present, you would not hear some of these really powerful messages. So thank you, Angelique, for the hard work that you continue to do. So we have one more panelist that I wanna get to, Gunraj. Not like I said, last but not least. I wanted to talk to you about some nature-based solutions in urban planning, and I think that goes into some of the infrastructure projects that we talked about with charity, and you know, some of the things that Fatu mentioned and Angelique mentioned, and even Adriana about, you know, ensuring that communities are worked with alongside some of these things. So one of the things that is mentioned in the climate space a lot is circular economy and the principles to build green infrastructure. So my question for you is, how can circular economy principles be harmonized with green infrastructure to enhance climate resilience in rapidly urbanizing areas, especially something that can contribute to the conversation for COP30?
Oh, fantastic question. So I'll take it on from here, and I think I'll be resonating a lot of things that have been said in the panel and the panel before. So my name is Gunraj Singh Talwar. I am an architect based out of Delhi, and my work falls at the intersection of material circularity, community resilience, and finally nature-based infrastructure. So as we approach COP30, it is impossible to ignore that the global south is urbanizing at breakneck speed. With the Next Generation India Fellowship, we are working on something called the Our Future India report, where we've identified rapid urbanization and climate change as two of the 5 disruptors that we believe would potentially change the planet as we know it. And here in cities like Delhi, where I come from, Nairobi, Sao Paulo, are expanding vertically, horizontally, but often unsustainably. So as the world, we pour about 14 billion cubic meters of concrete every year. But we also require 4,000 billion cubic meters of water. So the questions we need to start asking is, are we pouring more concrete or are we recharging aquifers? And herein, I can give you more questions such as this. Are we creating thermal corridors, or are we designing heat islands? And finally, are we designing for waste, or are we designing with waste? And herein, as an architect working in the urban space, I like to think of the climate crisis as an urban design crisis. And herein, circular economy and green infrastructure offer a fantastic way out, not as parallel agendas, but also as one united logic. So circular economy is about closing the loops in material, be it water, be it nutrition, be it energy. And green infrastructure is, as you've said in this panel before, is working with nature, where we identify not just nature as we know it, not just saving trees, but what are the natural processes that have made up the world, and how can they be preserved? So a lot of talk recently has, in the carbon sector, has been around carbon sequestration. But carbon sequestration is a natural process, right? We can do it through biochar, we can do it through advanced rock weathering, as they call it. But I think the tree is the OG sequester here, in giving you some youth voice too. And so these two logics go well hand in hand together, right? And I think we start with rethinking. What are we doing wrong? What is the conventional process that we have adopted, and why is it unsustainable? And in my domain of work, this has often been about reducing material demands. Why does the construction sector rely so much on virgin materials? Why are we so energy intensive? Why don't we reuse? When I was in school, they used to teach me that environmentalism is about reducing, reusing, and recycling. But the sector that I practice in now hardly is an advocate for the same. So why don't we change status quo with lessons that were as simple as grade 1? And now I'll talk about my work a little bit to give you some examples of how we've tried to change the game on green infrastructure and circular design. So first, in Delhi, I was a part of the initiative, which is called Delhi City of Lakes. And here we were working to revive water bodies and lakes in the city. So Delhi, I don't know if most of you know, but is landlocked. We don't have we don't have an ocean. We have a river, but the river is contested. So as a city that is growing at a rapid scale, we have a water scarcity that is only going to grow. And unfortunately, our lakes and water bodies are in dismal condition. Our river is dead. Our lakes don't look like lakes. They look like sewage traps. But something needed to be done. So the Delhi government had decided to revive its water bodies. And how could we do it? We did it with treated sewage, or wastewater, as you would know it. So why couldn't the infinite resource of sewage and wastewater in a city be recycled and used as a motive to rejuvenate its lakes? And that became the City of Lakes initiative. Now, it has a aesthetic value where you're improving city life. You're creating these fantastic water bodies that people can walk around, be around in. And I think that's the quality of a great city. But this had such an important environmental and social role to play. You see, when we started rejuvenating these lakes, groundwater aquifers started regenerating. And in one such sites, in only 2 years, we were able to identify and document a whopping 6 meters of aquifer recharge. That is what it takes nature to do it in a century. So I think that is where, we can work as catalysts to regenerate ecosystems at large. And while I was working with the city's lakes, I also started looking at its landfills, because now you have lakes, but then so many lakes we filled up to make waste mountains in the city. And landfills were full of this vast toxic mounds of forgotten material. But to me, as an architect, this was potential. And the potential was simple. Why couldn't this be packaged and brought back into the market as a sustainable or upcycled construction block? And this was the genesis of my startup, which is called Dumpcrete. We upcycle legacy waste, including ashes, including silts that we can recover from lake beds, for the matter, and turn it into construction blocks that we offer into the construction sector. India, I think, is doing very well in terms of the policy. We have a national resource efficiency policy. Our City of Lakes, as I mentioned to you, was a state level policy that we have created for nature-based solutions. And we also have other policies like Mission Life, which looks at I think one of our speakers spoke of livelihoods and our living patterns, and this is about how Indian living in its own right was perhaps the most sustainable way to do things, and why can't we get back to our roots and do things sustainably. And let's also talk about COP, since this is what the question was about. And I've spoken about the wonderful role nature-based infrastructure and green solutions can play. However, only 0.6% of global financing goes to NBS. And this is a huge delta, of course. So we need more funding. And I think anybody could say we need more funding, but we also need training. You see, even in India and in the global South, we can't just ask people to start building differently suddenly. It is not something that is going to happen overnight. And it is also in the global South that we need the most amount of development. We need to pour concrete, but can we pour it better? Can we pour it in a way that it doesn't disrupt nature? Can it be poured in a way that it is holistic to our development, which is also, biophilic in the sense that it admires nature? And here's that. But then finally, we also have to speak about equity. And I've spoken of equity in the aspect that the global South needs NBS and the training for NBS. But even here, we have inequity all around. And I, as an architect, can tell you that it's very easy for me to design nature-based solutions, SUDs, or any kind of green infrastructure in these wide boulevards and tree-lined avenues. But it's hard to do it at the slums. It's hard to do it for people who need it the most and are most affected by it. So herein, we need to really also determine toolkits that make our solutions scalable from what will be the city level, but also the grassroots and where it's needed most. Because see, it's the urban poor to me who are the worst affected by climate change in a city. And Delhi is polluted. We also have heat waves. We're suffering heat waves here, but then we also have tragic colds. And herein, I can be comfortable, but then there are people who can't be. So it's very easy for me to propagate NBS, but it's very hard to implement it on ground when our demographic is so diverse and has different needs. And that be all. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Gunraj, for that real life example of some of the work that you're doing. And I think it's a good thread into some of the things that the other panelists discussed and gave like some real life solutions on how in India you're finding solutions to some of the waste issues that you're facing and turning them into green opportunities by the City of Lakes. I found that discussion really interesting. So now I want to open the floor, or well, I know that people have posted questions in the chat for our panelists, and I'm just going to open it up for some of the questions. So the first question I have is for you, Adriana, and that comes from Neke and Agua. And they asked, what are the biggest obstacles and systemic barriers preventing youth-led climate adaptation projects, especially from Africa, from gaining momentum and accessing climate funding? How have you seen local knowledge practically integrated into adaptation efforts? And what strategies, including, well, we asked that already about the strategies that you have, but to continue effectively bridging gaps in this world?
Yeah, it's a question that doesn't have a simple answer, of course, and I've talked about it a bit. And the obstacles that I face, I also mentioned that the bureaucracy and the fact that we have to face so many barriers on the way that we apply for finances is what constrains young people also to apply for funding. And what I wanted to end maybe this message for today is to stay connected, to join the movement and to get involved and talk to people. And if we don't have the opportunity in our surrounding, then to maybe become a leader of these solutions, of these initiatives. And I know that adaptation is like hard and long-term work, right? As we talked about it today, and also deeply collective. So we need each other to do that. So to celebrate the wins, but also to stay grounded in the fact that it's not just only about surviving the climate impacts, but just building the kind of future we actually want to live in. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Adriana. Yes, building the future we want to live in. That's such a critical point. And the next question that we have in the chat goes to Charity. It's from Ayush and Ambe. And they've asked, as sea level rise and floods threaten coastal communities, how do you balance urgent needs for safe water and sanitation with ecosystem restoration while ensuring economic benefits from fishing and tourism? Wow, this is a really complex one. Can you share a moment that you felt the weight of these trade-offs on real families and how that has shaped policy towards resilience and dignity? That's a powerful question.
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you so much. And it's something that I definitely contend with still to this day. It's the reason why I chose to become a water engineer because, when you grow up without running water, without any of these things in a really small community, it weighs heavily on everyone. And it's not just an isolated experience in the Arctic, but it happens throughout Inuit communities, all throughout Alaska, Canada, Greenland, and Russia. And this question is so important, especially with kind of this increased interest from the United States in Greenland, and how people view the Arctic in general. I think for many countries in the global north, they see it more as a resource. They see it as an opportunity to, this is a good place for tourism. This is a good place for, quote unquote, like this idea of last chance tourism. This is your last time you could see a glacier, the last time you could see these things, or this is a good place to develop these critical minerals. And for us, it's almost a death wish almost, because these are areas where we haven't seen sea ice in the past decade, where we still don't have access to water, where we've had to make the really hard decision to relocate in the past, in the 1970s and the 80s. And we've done it successfully. But what happens when communities are forced to relocate like this is that we're often left behind. So many of these communities that relocate still don't have access to water and sewer services, that infrastructure that is so necessary to live, this infrastructure that many people are afforded those privileges when they live in bigger cities. So I think something I also wanted to address with, I don't want to take up too much time, but is this climate financing that happens. I think there's this misconception that because our communities, Arctic Indigenous communities, specifically Inuit communities, that because our communities lie in the global north, that we are afforded the same privileges that people in cities or in communities in the global north live on, when it's simply not true, when one of the biggest issues that we're facing is food insecurity, because we rely on our sea mammals for food, we rely on our ocean for food, and when that sea ice is no longer there, our sea mammals don't come back to us and we're not able to eat that. So we aren't afforded those same privileges. So I think an interesting thing that we're kind of looking at, especially as an Inuit youth delegate with the Inuit Circumpolar Council, with these upcoming meetings with COP30, but then also the meeting that's happening in Bonn in June, is how do we ensure that financing also goes to Inuit, to Indigenous peoples that live in the global north, which is interesting. And I know it's a hard topic to talk about, but we were simply not afforded the same privileges that people who live in New York City or who live in Los Angeles, these same privileges that these people have. And so it's something that we're really focusing on. But also another thing is, I think, is that the UN system in general, something that I've seen is that many of these parties, these countries are very well resourced. They have large teams, they have people that can sub each other in, whereas when Indigenous organizations are coming in, we're only able to send like 2 to 3 to 4 delegates to this. And it's very, very tiring being there. But we have to be there because often decisions are made about our lands that impact our lands the most, not only in the Arctic, but also throughout the world. So a lot of thoughts, but it's definitely a question I still contend with, but especially with the given administration and kind of how even our funding is being pulled, even in Alaska, because it's being associated with DEI. It's leaving many of our vulnerable communities at risk. Promises that were made in terms of building water infrastructure for these communities can no longer be made. Food insecurity continues to be a bigger issue, and when that funding is no longer there to support people on the ground, I think that's when things become very scary. But this idea of coming together as a collective brings me a lot of hope, but also learning from each other. There are over 180,000 Inuit across across Alaska, across Russia, across Canada, across Greenland. And I think something that we've seen is that when we come together and come to a consensus and kind of prepare for these negotiations, that we'll be fine, but also that no matter what happens on the ground in our communities, that's what ultimately will save us. These decisions to relocate, these new words that people come up with, like these scientists come up with, like mitigated retreat, these are things that our people have been doing for a very long time and have done it successfully. So there's a lot to learn from our people. There's a lot to learn from Indigenous peoples worldwide, but there's especially something beautiful about just even the way that our Native youth are kind of like leading these discussions and having uncomfortable conversations sometimes. So I hope I answered that, but it's definitely a question that I still contend with to this day.
It's a deep question, and I think you answered it very thoroughly, and gave some really important reflections on preparing when you get into multilateral spaces where things are being discussed, especially in something as deep as food security. I know that that is across the board, not just for one region, but and someone asked specifically about Africa, and that's a huge one, especially for net food importing developing countries. So I think you answered it very, very, very thoroughly. Unfortunately, you guys, we only have time for one more question. And this one is for Angelique. So for you, Angelique, since returns from ocean conservation take much longer compared to climate mitigation, how can we encourage more public-private financing? And this person, this is Nandini and Ayush again, they've asked specifically about the Asia context. And what did, sorry, they asked, have you ever faced a choice between pursuing an ideal international legal precedent versus an immediate win for your community? And what did that teach you? That's another painful question.
That's a lot to reflect on. I think I'll have to take the last one offline, because it requires a bit of reflection of the many years. But sorry, now I've lost your first question.
I can repeat it, don't worry. The first question is, how can we encourage more public-private financing? And they asked specifically about the context of Asia.
Yeah, I mean, again, apologies, I don't know that I'd speak very well to the context of Asia, in terms of my own experience, but I think it has become this conundrum, right? Of having to decide between, well, the case is clear that investors, public or private, prefer energy type or climate mitigation type investments because they know they'll get a return, and that's and a quicker return certainly than ocean conservation. So in order to and I think it's worth recognizing that is a fact. I think the narrative is slowly shifting. I know it's hard for people to digest, but it is slowly shifting that perhaps right now the ocean conservation space and the ocean and the investors that we have, there is no alignment in terms of what investors are prioritizing and needing versus what communities, countries are needing and what the ocean and planet needs, right? There is a mismatch. And I think we need to grapple with that mismatch. Obviously, one of the things that small island developing states have done, given the issues of climate vulnerability, the need for ocean resilience, as well as the need for money, is of course leveraging public funds to attract private finance. But this private finance so far has been impact investor type private finance, right? These are investors who are willing to be more patient, so to wait for the capital to come back later on, and willing to and want to report back on impact. They're not only thinking about the sort of high profit margin. So how we move that now to capital markets is the stage that we're at. But I think it's going to be a lot of certainly looking in the mirror for people in this space as to whether like how do we make those align? How do we make financial institutions, investors want to be more nature positive? I'll end it there. It's a long discussion. Thanks.
Yeah, and it's a very powerful discussion, a common thread that we see throughout any debate on climate financing. You know, how do you get the private sector to see this as a long-term value? I think sometimes it's only in the insurance companies see some of these things, but we won't get into that on this debate. So I want to just thank our panelists and maybe just give a couple of really great reflections and themes that I heard throughout this discussion. You know, we started off by talking about the importance of trust in these discussions and, you know, trusting in the local people and the communities and the young people and the ones that who are experienced and invested in the future, you know, especially as it relates to climate change. And I think that's something that's really powerful. We looked at the ocean as, you know, one of the biggest, one of the most important, I guess, factors in climate change and as a climate regulator. And even as, you know, in some ways a friend, the ocean is not necessarily a victim of the climate crisis. And we're asking ourselves, how can we leverage some of the ocean resources to actually save us from climate change? Looking at marine protected areas is one of those examples. We also, you know, we went all over the world. We talked about the Arctic and ocean stewardship. We talked about indigenous populations and the importance for food security and climate change and ensuring that we are protecting that knowledge and using that to develop infrastructure that really matters for those communities. And that was something that even Gunraj talked about in terms of the projects that he's working on in Delhi that incorporates some of, you know, asking the question, are we using the water for the concrete or are we using the water to drink? You know, all of these things are really important as we continue to move through this dialogue. And I'm really grateful to our panelists for sharing all their amazing insights and bringing some practical solutions that they're doing in their everyday work in climate change and to ensure that their voices as young people and as people experienced in this field are heard in these discussions. So I just wanted to thank our panelists and hopefully we could give a virtual round of applause for everyone. I'm going to clap from where I am. Thank you, everyone. So yeah, so I'm just gonna give some closing remarks and a bit of a wrap up so that you can know how to follow up with us. Please, if you've posted questions in the chat, just to let you know that they will be answered. And let's this conversation be a catalyst for action. As we look ahead to pivotal global events like COP30, the UN Ocean Conference, and the 2026 UN Water Conference, the themes, sorry, the themes that we explore today, climate adaptation, water resilience, ocean sustainability, and the vital role of the youth in this discussion, they're pressing now more than ever. So let this discussion continue outside of this forum. Whether you're a policymaker, an advocate, a student working at or someone working at UNF, a concerned citizen, each of us has a role to play in shaping a sustainable future. Engage with your communities, support innovative solutions, and amplify the voices of those on the front lines of climate change. I know that in my work as Director of Ocean and Climate Change, supporting small island developing states and climate vulnerable countries in multilateral negotiations on this issue is at the heart of what we do for my team. So And we're not stopping here, just to let you know. Our next pit stop will focus on the HLPF and the SDGs under review, exploring the power of technology and innovation to accelerate implementation. This intergenerational dialogue will take place on July 7th, so mark your calendars for that. If today's discussion inspired you, I know I'm inspired. We invite you to join us again, sign up for the next pit stop, stay engaged, and be part of the momentum driving solutions forward on the road to for the next millennium and 2100. The link can be found in this Zoom chat box and then our website. And I think my colleagues have posted that. Yes, they have posted that in the chat. So I just wanted to close off by saying thank you. Thank you to you all for being a part of this enlightening discussion. I'm deeply grateful for our esteemed panelists, Charity, His Excellency, Adriana, Angelique, Gunraj for sharing their invaluable insights and experiences. And we thank you so much for joining us. Have a good day, everyone.